Friday, September 22, 2017. The corridors of Liverpool Crown Court held an unusual silence that morning, the kind that settles over a building when something definitive is about to happen. 19 men sat in the dock, their faces varying between defiance and resignation. For 6 years, they had flooded towns and cities across Britain with heroin and cocaine, moving with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. They had mocked police officers during routine stops, filmed them with mobile phones, shouted abuse into bodycam lenses, convinced they operated beyond the reach of the law. But today, that illusion was ending. Outside the courtroom, detectives from Merseyside Police waited, some of them having spent years tracking these men through surveillance logs, phone records, and late-night stakeouts. This was the conclusion of Operation Scariver, a case that had mapped an entire criminal network from its base in Anfield, Liverpool, to vulnerable towns across the north of England and the southwest. Yet this wasn't the only story closing in on Liverpool's underworld that autumn. 4 years earlier, on October 15, 2013, Dutch police had forced their way into a small, unremarkable cafe in Rotterdam. Behind its locked door, they uncovered something far more significant than a neighborhood pub. Café de Etafel was a meeting place where international cocaine conspiracies were quietly arranged, where Liverpool traffickers sat down with European suppliers and South American cartel representatives to negotiate shipments worth tens of millions of pounds. Some of the men inside that cafe escaped the raid and spent years on the run. One hid in plain sight across Europe, moving between cities under false identities. Another vanished into Dubai's shadows, a city increasingly used by fugitives as a safe haven, where money flowed easily and extradition was complicated. Two very different stories, but together they reveal how Liverpool's criminal networks operated on both a local and global scale, and how investigators, through patience, international cooperation, and forensic precision, refused to let either empire stand. This is the story of a county lines gang that reigned for 6 years, exploiting vulnerable people and children to build a drug distribution network that became a blueprint for what would later be recognized as a national crisis. And it's the story of fugitives tied to an international cartel, men who believed distance and false passports could protect them, and how both groups were finally brought down. Before we go deeper, subscribe if you love true crime documentaries, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Between 2010 and 2016, a network of dealers operating out of Anfield in Liverpool built an empire that would spread across the country. At the center were 3 names that became familiar to detectives: Edward Murphy, Jaime Jarvis, and Stephen Harrison. They weren't sophisticated strategists or quiet operators. Their methods were brash, violent, and obvious to anyone who lived near them. But for 6 years they dominated the trade, and their success lay not in subtlety, but in overwhelming force and relentless supply. From their base in Anfield, a densely populated area of Liverpool with a history of organized crime, their supply lines pushed deep into other parts of the UK. Lancashire, Greater Manchester, West Yorkshire, Devon, and Cornwall all felt the impact. What began as a local operation soon turned into a model that mirrored what would later be recognized nationally as county lines, a term that wouldn't enter mainstream consciousness until the mid-2010s, but which these men were pioneering in real time. County lines refers to the practice of urban drug gangs, extending their operations into smaller towns and rural areas, using mobile phone lines to take orders and employing vulnerable people, often children, to move and sell drugs. The Anfield gang's reach was sustained by regular supplies of high-purity cocaine and heroin. Their source was a man named Francis Fenn, who could provide product at purities as high as 88%. Once cut down with agents like benzocaine or paracetamol, it became cheap street deals that could flood an area quickly. This was the foundation of their power. Move in fast, overwhelm local demand, and dominate before smaller groups could resist. The economics were simple. High-purity drugs meant more product after cutting, which meant more sales, which meant more money. And money, for Murphy and his associates, was both a tool and a symbol. But their control wasn't built on supply alone. Violence was never far away. The 3 leaders were known for intimidation and for making sure rivals were either pushed out or silenced. For communities in towns like Darwin, Lancashire, or smaller settlements in Devon, the sudden influx was unmistakable. Streets once quiet were now lined with new faces. Addicts who had been managing their dependencies suddenly had access to cheaper, more potent heroin. Teenagers who had never been involved in crime were approached with offers of quick cash. Locals began to notice cars with Liverpool registrations parked on residential streets, staying for days at a time. For 6 years, Murphy, Jarvis, and Harrison believed they had found a gap in the market and filled it. The reality was that they had pioneered a ruthless model of expansion, one that would shape the county lines crisis across Britain and force law enforcement to rethink how drug distribution networks operated in the modern era. Behind the gang's expansion was a tactic that became one of the hallmarks of county lines: exploitation. The men at the top rarely set foot in the towns where they pushed their trade. Instead, they relied on vulnerable people, addicts, teenagers, and children barely old enough to understand what they were being drawn into. One of their methods was known as cuckooing. It was simple and cruel. A vulnerable addict, often living alone, would be approached and offered free drugs in exchange for a place to stay. Once inside, the gang's dealers would take over the home. Within days, it was no longer the addict's address. It was a base of operations, a hub where products could be stored, cut, and sold. The addict was left trapped, used as a host, and paid in just enough heroin or crack to keep the arrangement in place. The term cuckooing comes from the cuckoo bird, which lays its eggs in other birds' nests. The metaphor is apt. The victim's home is overtaken, their autonomy stripped away, and they become complicit through dependence. For many, escaping was not an option. Refusal meant violence or the withdrawal of drugs, which for someone in the grip of addiction could feel like a death sentence. From these homes, the network expanded further. Dealers could arrive in a new town and almost overnight build a presence that was hard to dislodge. But it wasn't only addicts. Teenagers, some under 16, were pulled into the operation. Their age made them less suspicious to police, and their vulnerability made them easy to control. Some were groomed with gifts, phones, and cash. Others were coerced through threats or debt. Once involved, leaving was dangerous. The gang's reputation for violence meant that even the thought of walking away carried risks. One case stood out. In Darwin, Lancashire, one teenager became a stark example of how vulnerable children were drawn into the gang's world and how quickly they could become targets. He had been recruited to run drugs, traveling back and forth between Liverpool and nearby towns. His age meant he attracted less suspicion, but it also left him dangerously exposed. Before long, whispers began to spread. Other members suspected he had spoken to police. Whether this was true or not became irrelevant. Suspicion was enough. One older member turned on him, launching a terrifying chase through Darwin streets. Locals later described the scene as frantic, the boy running for his life, pursued by men determined to punish what they believed was betrayal. Panicked, he managed to reach a hotel, running inside to escape. In the meantime, he made a desperate phone call pleading for help. On the line, his voice shook as he explained that a group was outside. He feared he would be stabbed if he stepped back out. His words gave police a chilling insight into the pressure these children faced. Exploitation wasn't a side effect of the gang's business model. It was the core of it, and all of it was used to protect a network that thrived on other people's misery. For investigators, cases like this underscored the human cost of county lines operations. These weren't just drug conspiracies. They were systematic abuses of the most vulnerable, turning children into criminals and addicts into accomplices. For Edward Murphy and his closest associates, the rewards of the trade were worn on their sleeves. While their dealers worked the streets, Murphy cruised around Liverpool in a brand new Range Rover that cost the gang £6,000 a month to hire. It was a statement vehicle valued at over £100,000, impossible to miss in the neighbourhoods where he lived. Days after passing his driving test, he was seen behind the wheel of an Audi worth £40,000, another symbol of how quickly drug money turned into status. The flash wasn't limited to cars. Rolex watches adorned the wrists of key members, each one treated like a badge of achievement. Designer clothes, expensive hotels, champagne bottles cracked open in nightclubs. It all served the same purpose: to project success, to show the world that they were untouchable. On social occasions, the gang would order magnums of champagne, pouring freely while associates filmed on their phones. But Murphy's extravagance reached stranger places too. He had a fascination with fireworks. Police who raided properties later found hundreds of them stockpiled, enough to put on city-sized displays. He was known to set them off from rooftops in the center of Liverpool, bursts of color above the skyline, paid for entirely by drug profits. To him, it was a spectacular way of flaunting power in plain sight. Yet for those living alongside the gang, the contrast could not have been sharper. Behind the Rolexes and champagne, the reality was fear. Violence became a regular feature, reminders of what happened when territory was challenged. Intimidation spilled from backstreets into everyday life. Even police officers faced open abuse. For Murphy and his crew, money came in fast and was blown just as quickly. There was no laundering, no attempt to disguise the profits. Every penny was flaunted. This kind of behavior, while arrogant, also made them easier to track. Financial investigators could trace expenditures, link luxury purchases to known suspects, and build evidence of unexplained wealth. For a gang that believed they were untouchable, their lifestyle became a liability. By 2015, the gang's arrogance was impossible to miss. Hiding in the shadows was never their style. Bodycam cameras soon captured just how brazen they had become. In one routine stop, Edward Murphy, John Mangan, and William Summerall were pulled over by police. Instead of complying, they turned the moment into a display. They pulled out their phones and began recording. The men surrounded the officer and shouted abuse, calling him a rat and a fat mutt. Their voices carried across the street, attracting onlookers, as if humiliating the police in public could somehow place them above the law. Murphy barked at the officer to get back in his car. Summerall refused orders to stand still, pacing aggressively, shouting over every attempt at explanation. The tactic was calculated. Film the confrontation, drown it in abuse, and project dominance. For them, it was theater. For the officer, it was another reminder of how brazen these men had become. But the most dangerous confrontation came in February 2016. Police moved in on Summerall, who had taken to hiding drugs and weapons in an old club building on Townsend Lane. As officers surrounded the property, Summerall scrambled onto the roof in a desperate attempt to evade capture. From the street, a makeshift firebomb was thrown at police. 4 officers were caught in the flames, their uniforms and gear set alight. It was no longer about drugs. It was open hostility, a direct challenge to the police. For detectives, these clashes proved what locals already knew. The gang's arrogance and their attempts to intimidate even uniformed officers made them a serious threat. Each insult, each rooftop escape, each attack on police added to the growing case against them. But these confrontations also revealed something else: desperation. The gang's confidence was masking a growing awareness that law enforcement was closing in. By 2016 to 2017, Merseyside Police had already amassed a significant dossier on the Anfield gang through long-standing detective work. Teams had trailed vehicles late into the night, logged addresses visited by suspected couriers, and quietly watched patterns of behavior up and down motorways. Every journey, every exchange, every late-night visitor was recorded and compiled. Stash houses were identified. Detectives noted elevations of movement. Individuals arriving with packages, staying briefly, and departing with new ones. Surveillance units discreetly monitored houses and flats in Merseyside and across Lancashire. Recording cars arriving at odd hours, occupants carrying suitcases or bags, and men switching vehicles at service stations to avoid attention. Mobile phone data, call logs, cell site records provided connections between suspects and locations. Cell site analysis, a forensic technique that triangulates a phone's location based on which towers it connects to, became crucial. Investigators could place suspects at specific addresses at specific times, corroborating physical surveillance with digital evidence. Financial records, cash deposits, money flow, and expenditure were scrutinized to trace profits back to key players. Banks flagged unusual transactions. Cash deposits that didn't match declared income. Luxury purchases made by individuals with no legitimate source of wealth. All of it built a picture. When detectives were satisfied the network was mapped, they coordinated with the Crown Prosecution Service to secure warrants. On organized dates, Simultaneous raids struck across Merseyside and in outlying towns. Search teams entered properties, searching for hard evidence. In one raid, officers found large sums of cash hidden in drawers and suitcases, proceeds ready to be laundered. Another seized cutting agents, mixing powders used to dilute pure cocaine into street-grade products. In a flat, investigators uncovered scales dusted with residue alongside notebooks showing names, debts, addresses, and transaction amounts. These tick lists confirmed what detectives had long suspected about how money and drugs circulated. Weapons were also collected: knives, blunt instruments, and in some cases imitation firearms used for intimidation. Phones and SIM cards were seized and forensically imaged. Analysts extracted call records and messaging metadata, linking suspects to each other and to specific supply runs. Each raid chipped away at the infrastructure. Safe houses were shut down, stockpiles destroyed, routes interrupted. After a full year of surveillance and enforcement coordination, the physical backbone of the gang's operation was dismantled. What had once seemed untouchable became a series of shuttered addresses, seized evidence, and prosecution-ready files. The path to court was now clear. By September 2017, the work of Operation Scariver reached its conclusion inside Liverpool Crown Court. 19 men were finally brought before a judge. The evidence against them was overwhelming. At the top of the network, the sentences were clear and consistent. Edward Murphy, named as a central figure, was handed 11 years and 4 months. The same term was given to Jaime Jarvis and Stephen Harrison, both described as senior organizers in the conspiracy. The supplier, Francis Fenn, was also jailed for 11 years and 4 months. John Mangan, captured on bodycam cameras abusing officers, was sentenced to 8 years and 8 months. William Summerall received 7 years and 8 months. Others who played key roles in moving and distributing the drugs were dealt with firmly. Jaime Gray and Mark Farr were each sentenced to 6 years and 8 months, as were Walter Corrin, Liam Dickinson and James Tyrrell. Stephen Gandhi and Lewis Aspinall were both jailed for 6 years, alongside Francis Usher, who received the same. Lower-level couriers and facilitators were also punished. Eddie Hamilton and Ricky Doran received 5 years each. Abby Gill was jailed for 4 years and 9 months, while Callum Marrett received 4 years. Ataf Ali was given 6 years for his role. 2 teenagers, both just 16 when arrested, were dealt with differently. One received a 12-month referral order, the other a youth rehabilitation order with a curfew. Even here, the court made clear age did not excuse their involvement. Together, the 19 men were sentenced to a combined total of more than 135 years. For the communities they had terrorized, the sentences represented more than justice. They were a signal that county lines operations, no matter how entrenched, could be dismantled. But as one chapter closed, another remained unfinished. In October 2013, Dutch police moved in on a small bar in Rotterdam known as Café de Etafel. To anyone walking past, it looked like an ordinary neighborhood pub. In reality, it was a closed-door hub for Europe's most serious drug traffickers. Entry was controlled by a buzzer system. Only trusted faces were allowed inside. What officers found confirmed long-held suspicions. Hidden behind the cafe's doors was a meeting point where international suppliers and European buyers came together. Inside, investigators recovered handguns, radio scanners, and a cash-counting machine. Tools of an operation that went far beyond casual smuggling. This was cartel business, negotiations over routes, financing, and shipments of cocaine destined for Britain. And Rotterdam's port, one of the busiest in Europe, was the gateway. Rotterdam handles over 14 million containers a year, making it nearly impossible to inspect every shipment. For traffickers, this chaos was an opportunity. Cocaine could be hidden inside legitimate cargo, pushed through customs during peak hours, and extracted once containers cleared inspection. The port's sheer volume made it a favored entry point for South American cartels supplying European markets. The raid brought 2 names to the forefront of the investigation: Michael Mugan and Robert Gerrard, both from Liverpool. Intelligence linked them directly to the cafe and to the conspiracies being discussed within its walls. Detectives believed they were using the venue to cement ties with South American cartels, to negotiate prices, and to arrange the transport of multi-million-pound consignments. The plans revealed at Café de Etafel were vast. Investigators described them as commercial-scale trafficking conspiracies involving shipments measured in hundreds of kilos. Mugan himself told contacts that consignments could be hidden inside legitimate cargo, particularly meat imports from Argentina. The technique was simple but effective. Conceal cocaine within ordinary trade, push it through the chaos of a busy port, and extract it once containers cleared inspection. Prosecutors later characterized the conspiracy as worth at least £60 million. What made the operation so dangerous was its financial capacity. The conspirators had access to very large sums, often hundreds of thousands of euros in cash. This allowed them to purchase consignments outright, reducing supplier risk and guaranteeing repeated shipments. Corruption and secrecy reinforced the plan. Investigators learned that bribes to port staff were discussed as a way to guarantee safe passage for containers. At the same time, encrypted communications, secure PGP devices, and specialist handsets were used to arrange logistics and disguise the true meaning of messages. To outsiders, conversations looked ordinary, but to insiders, they revealed the details of international shipments. For the National Crime Agency and their Dutch counterparts, Café de Etafel was more than just a cafe. It was living proof of how organized crime operated across borders. South American cartels supplying Europe, Rotterdam as the entry point, and Liverpool traffickers like Mugan and Gerard arranging the flow of drugs into the UK. When Dutch police stormed Café de Etafel in October 2013, several suspects were arrested on the spot. Others slipped away. Among them were Robert Gerard and Michael Mugan. Both knew what was coming if they stayed. Within days, they were gone. Gerard, then in his early 50s and already familiar with law enforcement, disappeared into mainland Europe. This time, the allegations were even heavier. He was accused of playing a direct role in negotiating cocaine shipments worth millions. His name and photograph quickly featured in Operation Captura and Operation Return, high-profile most wanted campaigns by the National Crime Agency and Crime Stoppers aimed at fugitives hiding abroad. Mugan, from Croxteth in Liverpool, was in his 30s when he went to ground. Detectives said he was closely tied to the Rotterdam plot and was wanted for conspiracy to import cocaine. For years, his name remained on the NCA's list of most wanted fugitives. Intelligence placed him in the Netherlands, where he was thought to be using false identities. For Gerard, the pressure eventually became too much. In October 2016, 3 years after the Rotterdam raid, his solicitor arranged for him to hand himself in at Manchester's Central Park police station. He told officers that life as a fugitive had become unbearable. He was charged with conspiracy to import cocaine and within months pleaded guilty. By 2017, he was sentenced to 14 years in prison for his role in the conspiracy. Mugan, however, stayed hidden. While his associate began serving time, he remained one of Liverpool's most wanted men, a fugitive with direct ties to an international cartel pipeline. His absence kept the case alive, ensuring his name stayed in headlines long after the cafe raid itself had faded. For investigators, tracking Michael Mugan was never simple. He had access to fake passports and multiple aliases, which allowed him to cross borders and establish new identities. Intelligence reports suggested he moved through Europe using criminal contacts to stay hidden. At times he surfaced in the Netherlands, still close to the networks that had shaped the conspiracy. Years later, traces pointed further afield. Mugan is believed to have spent time in Dubai, a city increasingly used by traffickers as a safe haven, a place where money flowed easily and where identity papers could be forged or bought. Dubai's lack of extradition treaties with many countries made it attractive to fugitives. From there, he was thought to move between other countries in the Middle East and Europe, never staying in one place long enough to be pinned down. The National Crime Agency, working alongside Dutch counterparts, refused to let the case go cold. Mugan's name and image appeared on international most wanted campaigns, circulated across the UK and the Netherlands as a high-value target. Even while he was in hiding, surveillance pressure mounted. NCA officers, with the support of Dutch police, followed up on leads across Europe. They tracked financial transactions, monitored known associates, and flagged suspicious travel records. Mugan's ability to remain at large for nearly a decade only underscored the level of resources at his disposal, but every year on the run added pressure. Gerard had already handed himself in, but for Mugan the walls were slowly closing in. Wherever he went, Amsterdam, Dubai or beyond, law enforcement was never far behind. By 2021, Michael Mugan had been a fugitive for almost 8 years. Leads pointed to Dubai, where investigators believed he had been moving between properties under false identities. That year, the breakthrough came. Working with Dubai Police, the NCA tracked Mugan's movements and coordinated a plan to bring him in. In April 2021, officers in Dubai arrested him. The capture marked the end of nearly a decade in hiding and removed one of the last men still wanted over the Café de Itafel conspiracy. For law enforcement, the arrest in Dubai was not just about one man. It was proof that fugitives, no matter how far they ran, could still be found. What followed was a complex process of extradition. Mugan was held in custody in the United Arab Emirates while arrangements were made to return him to Britain. Under the supervision of NCA officers, he was flown back to the UK to face trial. For detectives who had pursued him since 2013, it was the conclusion of one of their longest manhunts. In 2023, Michael Mugan finally stood in the dock at Manchester Crown Court. Confronted with the evidence from the Café de Itafel investigation, he admitted conspiring to import Class A drugs. The prosecution outlined how he had been central to the plan and the use of encrypted phones to shield his movements. When the sentence was passed, the weight of his years on the run was clear. Mugan's case stood as proof that international conspiracies built on secrecy and intimidation could still be brought down. His empire never reached the heights he had planned, and in the end, the years spent in hiding only delayed the inevitable. Mugan was jailed for 12 years, a term that reflected both the scale of the conspiracy and his determination to avoid capture for so long. These two cases, though different in scale and scope, reveal how modern drug trafficking operates and how law enforcement has adapted to combat it. The Anfield gang represented a localized but devastating model of exploitation, one that turned vulnerable people and children into the machinery of a criminal enterprise. Their downfall came through patient surveillance, forensic analysis, and coordination between local police and the Crown Prosecution Service. The Café de Itafel conspiracy, by contrast, was international in scope, involving South American cartels, European ports, and traffickers who moved across borders with ease. Its dismantling required cooperation between the National Crime Agency, Dutch police, and authorities in Dubai, underscoring how modern policing must operate across jurisdictions to be effective. Both cases highlight the human cost of drug trafficking. The teenager chased through Darwin streets, the addicts whose homes were taken over, the communities flooded with cheap heroin and cocaine. These weren't abstract crimes. They had faces, names, and lasting consequences. They also reveal the resilience of law enforcement. Investigators spent years building cases, tracking suspects, and ensuring that even those who fled could not escape justice. The sentences handed down, totaling more than a century and a half of prison time, sent a clear message. No network, no matter how entrenched or international, is beyond reach. The legacy of these cases extends beyond individual convictions. The Anfield gang's methods helped define what we now understand as county lines, a model that has since been replicated across Britain and has become a central focus of UK policing strategy. The Café de Itafel conspiracy exposed how international cartels use European ports as gateways and how encrypted communications and corruption facilitate large-scale smuggling. In response, law enforcement has adapted. County lines operations are now met with specialized task forces, early intervention programs for vulnerable children, and tougher sentencing. International cooperation has improved, with agencies like the NCA working seamlessly with counterparts across Europe and beyond. Yet the problem persists. New gangs rise to replace those dismantled. New technologies, from encrypted apps to cryptocurrency, offer traffickers fresh ways to evade detection, and vulnerable people, addicts and children, remain the targets. These cases remind us that the fight against organized crime is not won with a single trial or a single arrest. It is a continuous effort, requiring vigilance, resources, and above all, a commitment to protecting the most vulnerable from exploitation. The men sentenced in Liverpool Crown Court in 2017 and the fugitives brought back from Dubai years later are now behind bars. But the networks they built, the tactics they pioneered, and the lives they destroyed leave a legacy that law enforcement and communities continue to grapple with. And in that grappling, in the refusal to let any empire stand, there is hope that the next generation of traffickers will find it harder to succeed, and that the next generation of victims will find more protection.